All right, how's it going, guys? This is Eric here with Exclusive Tutoring San Diego. And what I want to do over this podcast, we've got all summer. I want to give you guys some tips and tricks so that in terms of education, we can start to evolve the things that we do. One of the most common issues that I come across is when kids get sent to me simply because they lack motivation. And what I want to point out is the fact that motivation actually has three main components to it, that if we answer no to any of these, we actually end up losing all sense of motivation, self-motivation in that. Now, what are these three questions? They're broken down into three main categories. Number one, can I do it? Number two, will it work? And number three, is it worth it? Now, depending on the student, depending on the language that's used around them, they generally will answer no to one of these simply because they haven't found the correct resources, they haven't found the correct answers to answer yes to them. All right. For example, number one, can I do it? A lot of times, can I do it is actually rooted in trust. What a student needs to understand is that they've been given the trust to do what they need to do on their own. For example, a lot of parents, in terms of education, have too much of a hold on their children's academics, meaning that they're always the ones checking up on everything. Is homework done? Is it being sent in? Are we getting the grades that we need to? Instead of it being the student's responsibility. I have a very specific example of this. When I went to go consult with a brand new student over at their house, I remember talking to the parents, and mother straight up came up to me and told me, my daughter doesn't have motivation. My daughter isn't motivated to do the things that she needs to for school. And I brought up these three questions. Can I do it? Is it worth it? Or can I do it? Will it work? And is it worth it? And in that situation, the student was actually thinking that she could do it, but is it worth it? No, simply because mom would always check up on her. And I remember asking mom, do you trust your child to do her work? Do you trust her to do these things? And mom says, yeah, I give her plenty of trust. I trust her to do her own homework. I trust her to do everything that she needs to. And I remember as I said this, the daughter from the other room chimed in and very loudly exclaimed, no, mom, you never trust me. You never ever do. You check in on everything that I do. And so one of the things that we do need to point out is that sometimes what's happening is that we have a miscommunication. What the parents may think they're doing actually doesn't quite translate into how the student sees things. And we do need to come to some sort of meeting of the minds. We need to bring these things up so we can start to correct them. Now, the most important change, and the most important time that I would say would actually be from your elementary through your high school years. That middle school time is where you really want to start to invest in trust in your student. We always hear of these stories of students forgetting their homework and mom and dad scrambling home to grab that extra homework to bring to school. But what you're actually teaching your student there is that you will always be their backup. You will always be the final evaluator. And ultimately, these students are the ones who go through school and are always checking in on mom and dad to see if these are the right things that they should be doing. What you actually want is you want your high schooler to be self-sufficient, to be able to make their own decisions. And a lot of the times you have to realize, when are mom and dad making too many decisions for their students? When are you choosing the extracurriculars? When are you choosing their activities instead of giving them options and letting them make their choices instead? So that big component of self-motivation, can I do it? That's the first one. And a lot of the times that also comes down to their resources. If you don't have the resources in order to achieve and accomplish what you need to, if you don't have the right teacher, you don't have the right lessons or the materials, the practice materials, students will start losing motivation simply because they don't see a way out. They don't see a way to achieve what they need to. Now, what I want to point out is that there's a very interesting phenomenon in the fact that we don't ever teach our students how to learn. The students who tend to do better in education have been given the responsibility to learn how to learn. So if education were a game and your mind were one of the tools that you're using for this game, how are we supposed to use it so that we have an advantage over the others? And a lot of students actually go into school assuming that the tool set they're given is simply what the teachers have, meaning if your teacher has been the tool set, the one way or the one format and the one plan for you to achieve, for you to learn, then you will always seek that teacher or seek those styles of teachers in order to learn. Now, what I want to have students understand is the fact that we have plenty more teachers that are available to us with the, invention of the internet. And now with YouTube and Google, there are a lot of little things we can do and searches that we can do in order to give ourselves back that advantage. You might not have the best math teacher in front of you today, but you do have the option and the ability to go find plenty more resources online, such as Google, such as YouTube, that are just a little search away. Just with the cell phones and the computers that we have access to, we have the ability to go and absorb more information than our ancestors. So that's one thing. Can I do it? Most of the time the question is only answered with a no. If in this situation we don't have the trust to do what we need to do, we don't have the autonomy, the trust to do things on our own without somebody looking over our back. And another part of it is to know that we have the resources actually available to us all across the world, all across the internet. It's just a search away. I'll give you a quick little tip here, actually. The favorite things that I like to put into my search box when it comes to Google are the letters PDF, because what that does is it finds you a text-rich document that would actually have all the little formats put in there. You could put the word study guide, you could put the word lesson, tricks, tips, techniques. Just make sure you put that main topic or the subject, the category that you're looking at. So for example, you're doing perfect squares or the title of that chapter in your math book. You take that word, you take the vocab word, put it into the search box, add the words PDF, add the words worksheet, add the words test, depending on what you're getting ready for, and see if you can get some extra practice. Realize this. Every student has a different level of learning, has a different position in which their level of learning exists at. So some of us have less knowledge and some of us have more. This is all due to the experience that we've had in our world and the observations that we've happened to make. So if there are some students at your school who act as if they don't really spend very much time in homework and don't really have to spend the effort to achieve their grades, what I want to remind you is that's a very damaging thought to have. A lot of these students are actually gaining the thoughts, gaining the wisdom and intelligence that they have simply through experience. They might have gone through a camp or gone through a class that you simply haven't. And in doing so, they've observed things or learned things from specific teachers. And that was simply a matter of time. It has nothing to do with God-given intelligence or talent or genius, brain activity, etc. All of it comes down to the experience and the observations that we make. So with that being said, that first one was autonomy. Can I do it? And a lot of kids, again, if you answer no to this, all that motivation is gone. The second question, after can I do it, will it work? Because again, if you do something and you continuously fail upon it, continuously come across a negative reaction, what the mind becomes trained to do is to avoid that situation. And a big part about this of can I do this, we need to make sure that students understand that language is very important. I can't do this is one of the most damaging phrases that you can come across, simply because the mind starts to invest in these words and invest in these phrases that they commonly hear. What ends up happening is the words that we hear being described about us start to manifest themselves, and we start to believe in them more and more. I'm going to use myself as an example and my brother as an example, and the words that were used around us as we were growing up. My mother would always praise me for my math abilities. Now, a big part of this was simply because my mom threw me into a lot of, preparatory math classes, testing classes, things, and found teachers for me that would teach me the processes of math that my other fellow classmates in school didn't necessarily have. So that extra experience and extra observation that I was able to make, the time that I spent, led to a better understanding. Now, the big part of that was the language. My mom would always say, Eric's good at math. Eric's a little bit more naturally talented. Now, obviously, those words, we'll talk a little bit more, lead to what we call a fixed mindset in psychology. However, that thought process made me seek math problems and made me seek the understanding of math more. Now, on the other hand, my mom loved to say, Eric doesn't like to read. Eric doesn't pick up books. He generally doesn't like to do that. And so if you look at my bookcase back at home, the childhood bookcase in my room, what you would probably notice is that there's mostly CDs in terms of music. There's plenty of different material or different magazines and other reading materials, but you don't see too many books on my bookshelf. What had happened was my mom had invested in this language that only resulted in what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her simply stating that I wasn't a good reader or good writer made me believe in those thoughts and made me seek less of that behavior. Whereas if my mother had simply said, Eric loves to read books about basketball, Eric loves to read books about sports, maybe that would have manifested itself into reading more about those situations. Now, if you look at the magazines, I had every basketball magazine, every sports magazine out there. So it wasn't as if I wasn't motivated to read, and it wasn't as if I didn't want to read. It was simply just the fact that that language led me into believing a certain personality and behavior about myself. Now, this leads me into a very common phrase that I hear from a lot of families out here. And I know that it develops itself over time simply because we hear phrases that can help us explain the phenomenons that we don't quite understand. So one of the most common ones that I hear is this: we're not a math family. My students were not very great at reading or writing, or we weren't very great at writing when we were younger, so that must mean how my students will be. I want to help you understand that that's a very damaging thought process, because what ends up happening is these students start to believe that they actually don't have the capacity for something. I like to use a video game example. It's as if your character in this video game of life started with an attribute under math intelligence, and that math intelligence will never go up. It might go down, but there's no way for you to add into those attribute points. And thinking and believing that your skill, your ability in math is limited like that, only makes you seek those situations. And so I commonly have many students who identify as the student who struggles in math. And even when they come across the right answer, they love to go and stop and re-question what they're doing and ask, is this the right answer? Even when they do personally know that they have the right answer, they've done all the steps that they need to, the hesitation that comes from it is simply because they've been told that they, as an identity, and their behavior always leads to them struggling in math. So a big part of this, can I do it, has a lot to do with your failure identity. What failure identity is that a lot of kids actually believe that their shortcomings, the things that they aren't able to achieve, actually have to do with who they are. It's their identity. It's not actually just the behavior. In the situation when failure is a behavior, we actually create a situation that students can go and correct that. If your behavior leads to failure, then the correction of your behavior can lead to the better results and can ultimately fix what it is that you're trying to fix. However, if your identity is the fact that you've failed, if you as a person are a failure, it becomes very, very hard to ever identify with something else until you've been able to push those thoughts back. A lot of that comes down to self-confidence, and self-confidence leads into that self-motivation as we start to answer, yes, I can do it, and that competence that you're missing is a big component to that motivation. Students who look at their shortcomings, they identify as the failure, will never ever go seek competence, simply because as a failure, if you identify as a failure, you wouldn't ever be able to achieve competence. However, if failure is a behavior of yours, then achieving competence is simply figuring out the right tools in order to achieve that success. All right? Now, we've gone through two of the questions, the very last one. So the first two questions was, can I do it, right? And the second is, will it work? And the last question that we have is the question, will it be worth it? Is this action or is this behavior that I'm doing worth my time? And in a lot of times, behavior and what students say is that it's not actually worth their time to do these things. Why? Because there's other things that are a priority. I like to flip that thought process and flip that language around. If it's not worth your time, very likely it's not a priority of yours. And in a lot of situations in here, especially in the competitive